Hi, everyone. We're just going to give it a minute so that people can join us from the waiting room. I think we can get started. Welcome, everyone, to today's webinar. Today's webinar is called Are You Ready for the PA Home Energy Rebates? Hear from the PA DEP and Case Studies from the field. Today's webinar is going to run for approximately an hour and a half, and we're going to have time at the end for a Q&A session with all our presenters and panelists. Before we get started, I just want to quickly tell you a little bit more about the Housing Alliance. We are a statewide coalition working to increase access to safe, decent, and affordable housing for all Pennsylvanians. Webinars are free for members. So if you aren't a member already, do visit housingalliancepa.org to become a member or contact us at info@housingalliancepa.org for more information. Let me move on to the next slide. Very nice. So this is what your screen probably currently looks like. If you have a technical question for the Housing Alliance staff, please use the chat function. If you have a question for the speakers and the panelists and the presenters, use the Q&A function that you can find to the bottom right of your screen. You will have the ability to upvote questions that you want to ask yourself or that you really like so that they can move to the top and our moderator will be able to see what questions have the most upvotes. I also wanted to mention a few more events that we're going to be organizing. We have the Rural Pennsylvania Housing Summit on the 23rd of July from 8:30 a.m. to 5 p.m., which will be in the Nittany Lion Inn at State College. Registration opens on May 19th. We also have a few more upcoming webinars. There's one on Wednesday, May 21st, on the fair housing laws and HUD guidance workshops for service providers. We will also have multiple surveys and webinars from the same group on energy efficiency in the upcoming months. So keep an eye out on our newsletter, on our Instagram page for more information on those. Before we get started, I just want to quickly talk about why this is important. And so why energy efficiency matters for affordable housing. Utility insecurity is a critical component of housing stability, and extremely low-income households, while they represent only 26% of the renters in the state, 71% of them are severely cost-burdened, and they spend more than half of their income on housing, which includes rent and utilities. This often comes at the expense of other basic needs, such as food, healthcare, and overall housing stability. We also know that the energy burden is not just harming renters, it can also negatively impact landlords as well. In a Housing Alliance survey of landlords, 84% cited the rising cost of utilities as a major concern. This is why the Housing Alliance has partnered with PULP, RHLS, Action Housing, and New Ecology to ensure that all of you know about the new resources to address utility insecurity as it impacts affordable housing. The new energy efficient programs through the Inflation Reduction Act offers a promising solution, reducing utility costs for tenants while also lowering long-term operating expenses for affordable housing providers. By improving energy efficiency, properties can remain both affordable and financially viable, contributing to housing stability for low-income renters. This is a series that will happen throughout the year to make sure that affordable housing providers and community learn more about energy efficient rebate programs, how you can prepare to take advantage of these programs, and what to expect as they move forward. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to our moderator and our first speaker, Joshua.
Good afternoon, everyone.
Here we go. Joshua, I think it's you should be seeing the PowerPoint now. Sorry for the delay.
I can see it. Looks great.
Great. Take it away, Joshua.
Thank you. Thank you all for coming today. We're very excited to share some updates and some stories from the field. As we know, the things that we've put into practice are the things that we believe can actually happen rather than the dreams that we have. Today, I'm going to talk a bit about our experience, and Sarah is going to mention some work that she's been working on, and then we're going to chat with the DEP folks. New Ecology was started 26 years ago, and we're a nonprofit focused on bringing the benefits of sustainability to underserved populations. We're a diverse group of folks with engineers, architects, builders, data scientists, researchers, and educators, and we work from concept to operations. So from the first idea of a project all the way through to operations. Today, I'm going to talk about 2 properties and their approach to renovations. One of the biggest challenges in multifamily affordable housing is how do you renovate buildings and replace systems while residents are in place. Next slide, please. So this first one is from a project we did in Delaware. And the idea here is that the owner had a property from the 1970s that needed systems to be replaced, and they were looking for affordable and energy efficient solutions that would simplify operations and not really increase utility costs. And so what we did is looked at ways to improve energy efficiency while reducing operating costs. And that combination is possible when you improve the building envelope, air sealing and insulation, new doors, windows, ventilation systems, and replacing the existing gas furnaces with electric heat pumps. This is not a full electrification. The existing systems were a combination boiler, so heating, space heating, and domestic hot water in one, and they were removed, and individual heat pumps were put in for each apartment, and then central condensing gas water heaters for each building. And there were 15 buildings, 165 apartments. And a big question about this process is it going to be more expensive for residents to operate? And in this case, the answer is no. We were able to, through the building efficiency operations, we're able to reduce energy use by 57%, which is a huge number, and we'll be the first to admit you don't always see these savings. One of the issues was the combination boilers that they had were operating at higher levels than they needed to be. And so through operations, residents would keep their windows open in the winter because it would be getting too hot in their apartments. And so by taking away systems that were not sized and assembled correctly, we were able to significantly save energy both for the owner and for residents. So residents, they had an increase of 1% on their electricity bill after the renovations were in place. And so that comes out to be 46 cents per month per apartment. And that is an ideal situation. We don't always get exactly that, but that's one of the main things we think about. This was partially funded by the Energize Delaware program that New Ecology administers for the Delaware Sustainable Energy Utility, and provided about $440,000, about a third of the cost of the renovations for this work. This was done in 2020, and so we actually have data afterwards to show the effectiveness of it. Next slide, please. Another scale is looking at an entire building and making the decision to go to a net zero energy and net zero carbon operations. And so this is a high rise in Rome, New York, that we were part of, that finished construction a year ago. And the strategy here was to start off with replacing all the systems that had gas, replace them with electric, and then have electric, solar PV systems on site and off site through a community solar program to cover all of the energy needed for the building. And so this ended up being the first multifamily affordable net zero carbon building in New York. They're crunching the data now, so we don't have the operational data, but the process was one in which the existing apartments, as shown here on the left, were very small and cramped and did not provide an ideal living situation for seniors. And so what they did is, in the renovation, they expanded the size of the apartments. And so this light green background, that size is of the former apartments, and then I just superimposed that over the floor plan for the new apartment. So you can see we added, or the team added, about a 6-foot wide and say 20-foot long space to provide more living space and provide a closet. We never have enough of those in the process. And we're able to keep 75% of residents in place during renovation. They did switch from 99 apartments to 74 apartments, but in that process, we're able to keep a lot of the residents in place and then provide a building that's a lot less expensive to operate and a lot more comfortable. And so one of the excuse me, one of the things I wanted to talk about is there's a bunch of different strategies when you're trying to move through energy efficiency and decarbonization. The first example, in which we looked at replacing systems and doing energy efficiency, is kind of a standard approach. And then this net zero approach is to really go all the way. And so by adding these 4 inches of exterior insulation around the building and recladding it, and then installing a geothermal system with heat pumps in each apartment, we're able to really bring the energy use down to a substantial amount that you could then power the building or offset the power required with on-site solar and off-site community solar. Next, please. The next, thank you. The next piece to talk about is electrification. We hear a lot about electrification, and it's not a simple matter. It's not just take out your gas stove and put in an electric stove. There's a lot of different pieces to think about. One of the main things is to get the pollutants out of the living space, and so not to have combustion appliances, either the gas dryer or range or heating system, and also to look at efficiency. And so we'll look at an example in this graph that compares water heating strategies. So hot water needed, this 9.6 BTUs is the amount of hot water that's needed in this apartment, and then or on the site. And then the gas water heater provides that 10.1. The condensing gas water heater is 95% efficient. To generate that, here's the caveat here, to generate the 9.6 million BTUs, the water heater has to burn 42 million BTUs of fuel. Whereas the electric heat pump water heater, to generate that 9.6, it only uses 2.8 million BTUs. And so that just in terms of the amount of energy used, it's much less efficient to use that gas system than to use a heat pump water heater. And we'll look at why that is in the next slide, please. I skipped a slide, but yeah, I'll just go talk about this one for a second. So the idea here is that it's not that it's some magic thing that happens. It's based on science. And so the efficiency of the electrical system is based on that heat pump, which is 340% more efficient than a standard electric water heater. And it's because of that heat pump technology. And that heat pump is the same thing that's providing air conditioning in your apartment or in your house. And so it's that same technology, but just applied to a water heater. And it can be done either individual heat pump water heaters or more likely on a multifamily building, central water heaters connected with a piped loop throughout the building. Next slide, please. This is the graphics are so emphatic because electrification is an important thing, but it's also can be a dangerous thing, and dangerous in terms of indoor air quality. If you're going to take out your electric appliances and take out gas appliances and put in electric appliances, that makes a lot of sense as long as you're also air sealing, improving insulation, and providing good ventilation. And if you're not, you could end up spending a lot more money for heating because electricity by unit is more expensive than gas. And so it's this duality that we've talked about is you have to do the electrification piece and the envelope improvements. And the reason we want to do both is to make sure that we can provide heating in each room, systems is sized correctly, and you're not going to increase resident utility bills. If you're going to provide only water heater, if you're going to replace only the water heater, you can do an electric resistance water heater, but it's not as efficient as we saw in the previous slide. And so the goal is really to replace the systems to provide more effective, efficient, and durable systems, and ones that the residents can use and operate. Next slide, please. This is a lot of technical pieces that we have shared with you, and we're here to find out what are the pieces you need. Would it be helpful to have office hours where you all could call in and ask questions about properties that you're working with, or have planning meetings for individual companies or individual properties? Have energy audits where we look at energy efficiency and electrification, site visits to track any issues that are happening, or have discussions about rebates and incentives, legal advice. And so please vote here, and then we'll use this to guide the offerings that we share with people. And if you see things that you're not that are not listed here, you can just put it in the chat, and we'll remain on the call for that last half hour to answer any questions that people have. Our goal really with this program is to provide guidance wherever it is you need guidance, whether you're trying to look at an entire portfolio or look at a building or even on the apartment scale. And with that, I'll pass it over to Sarah. Thank you.
Okay, hello everybody. I'm Sarah Rolich with Action Housing, Senior Energy and Construction Manager. Next slide, please, Liz. So if everybody doesn't know, Action Housing is a nonprofit developer of affordable housing based in Pittsburgh. We were founded in the 50s to focus on good housing in neighborhoods in the city of Pittsburgh. And we primarily work in Allegheny County in the southwestern part of the state. We have been doing real estate development in the current form that we are now since about 1985. And we've developed a good number of units, both single family and multifamily over that time period. Next slide, please. So we specialize in high quality, energy efficient, affordable housing. So most of our newer developments are certified Energy Star multifamily new construction and enterprise green. We have done passive house in the past as well. We really try to focus on energy conservation measures, healthy building materials, and energy efficiency and healthy environments for our tenants. Next slide, please. So with that, doing real estate development since the 80s, we have a lot of older buildings in our portfolio. I know a lot of owners around the state are in the same boat. We continue to own and operate approximately 2,000 units of affordable housing in the region. Many of these buildings are older and in need of major capital improvements like HVAC system replacements. We're seeing rise of costs of utilities, not only for just how much you pay for the utility per kilowatt hour, but also just the systems getting older and getting less efficient over time, and also indoor air quality issues, that being gas appliances in the living space and or ventilation systems that are beyond their useful life. Next slide, please. So the need, and this slide is looking a little bit strange, but the need, Chris mentioned a lot of this in the opening, but it is estimated that 60% of affordable housing stock in Pennsylvania was built more than 20 years ago, which means it is old and likely needs system replacements and a little bit of help. Older affordable buildings, have deferred maintenance or energy inefficient, and oftentimes lack the necessary funds for improvement. So that's why we're excited about these programs that the DEP is going to run is another tool in our arsenal to try to update our buildings. And then we have the energy burden issue that Chris talked about in detail in the opening slide for the tenants. Next slide, please. So at Action Housing, we have taken a deep dive in our portfolio to kind of prepare for the Inflation Reduction Act funding sources, but also as an asset management tool to try to get an understanding of what our needs are and how we can move forward and how we can update these buildings. So we did a portfolio analysis, benchmarking being the primary item. We worked with our utility over the last decade to get whole building information, our data. So we were able to do some benchmarking to understand the energy usage in our buildings so we can smartly plan for the future and to prioritize buildings that need the most help. We also performed asset management inspections to see what buildings needed the most from a capital needs perspective, interviews with property management, and then obviously documenting all the capital needs. Because without the data, it's really hard to prioritize buildings and to understand what funding sources can pay for what. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit about our benchmarking. So we use a tool called the EUI, which is energy use intensity, which is basically your energy usage per square foot per year. It allows you to compare different buildings of different unit counts and sizes with each other. So you can really focus on the buildings that need the most and also the buildings with the highest potential of energy savings. And the calculation incorporates all of your utilities, electric, gas, oil, all together. Next slide, please. And then it's important whenever you start to think about using the HER and the HERE programs in your buildings is what type of systems that you have in your buildings. So we did a full HVAC inventory of our buildings, and HVAC stands for heating, ventilation, and air conditioning, to understand what is central versus individual and what is gas versus electric. So central means you have a central plant, a boiler or like system that feeds the entire building. Individual systems means you have an individual unit in each apartment. And that is really going to be key on what program can apply to your buildings. And also the age of the systems and any issues with them. And then along with the energy data, that's how we are using this to prioritize buildings and to understand what programs will work for what. And, as property owners of a larger portfolio, we do our best to take advantage of all the rebates and incentives and funding sources we can to really focus on the preservation of affordable housing. So these buildings can stay affordable, stay functioning for 20, 40, 50 years. So these pictures you see, we have a central gas-fired, the boiler on the bottom. That feeds the entire building. It's gas-fired. It feeds the entire building with hot water. For the heating systems, and then to the right, it's an individual gas-fired. It's a VTAC unit, which means it's a vertical packaged, vertical terminal air conditioner, which means it vents directly through the wall, and it is individual to that tenant space. Next slide, please. So some of our past building renovations and energy retrofits, just a few examples of what we've done in the past and how we're using that knowledge for the future. We've done a 9% LIHTC energy efficient retrofit, McKeesport Downtown Housing. It was 84 SRO units plus a shelter. It was renovated to passive house standards, completed in 2015. We removed the gas system and installed an all-electric system, upgraded the envelope windows, and even with added air conditioning and the switch from gas to electric, the overall energy reuse reduction was 68%. So like it was said earlier, you can do gas to electric. You just have to focus on the envelope as well to really achieve that savings. And then also the utility programs that we have through Act 129 in the state of Pennsylvania. I've taken approximately 20 of our buildings through our local utility program and was able to get LED lighting throughout. Different utilities have different types of programs, types of rebates, types of incentives. So I urge you to contact your utility, your electric utility in your area to see what is available to you. And then multifamily weatherization, which we hope is going to be coming online again this year or next, pending federal funding. We were able to do clean and furnace, clean and tunes, upgrade LED lighting, and upgraded the ventilation systems in a 72 unit building in Pitcairn, Pennsylvania. Next slide, please. So the really important question I think everybody wants to know is what of these new programs that the DEP is going to tell us about can be used in my buildings? And this slide's looking a little goofy too. I apologize for that. So the HERE program is really geared towards individual systems, and which means individual systems in each apartment, not that central system that I showed you with the boiler. And the heat pump rebate has a requirement that all equipment have a SEER rating of at least 15.2. And SEER is seasonal energy efficiency ratio, which means not every heat pump is created equal. Some are more efficient and some are less efficient. The heat pump systems that are likely to qualify for the HERE program are split systems and mini splits, not the PTAC and the VTAC units where you see the grills on the outside of the buildings. But your building can be retrofitted for any system, as long as you are able to deal with the envelope and the infill of the old existing vent holes. And then the HERE program is geared more towards multifamily because it's more flexible. You have to achieve a 20% energy reduction, modeled reduction, any way you can. So you're able to have a little bit more flexibility with what type of systems that you're putting in. And this picture just shows a condenser farm on a roof of a multifamily building. So each one of those condensers is feeding back with the refrigerant line to a unit in each apartment. And so that's a traditional split system heat pump that would qualify for the HERE program. Next slide, please. So in planning for a project, I think I've talked a little bit about Crafton Towers in previous presentations and webinars. It's our building, 103 units. It was built in 1974 in Crafton, Pennsylvania. This is the one that we have been focusing on the most and the earliest because it had the highest need and it was the second highest EUI in our portfolio. So we are looking at doing a full HVAC system replacement. It does have the VTAC through the wall units, as you can see from the grills on the building at every apartment. So we are not anticipating being able to use the HERE program for the heat pump replacements. However, we are looking at doing some air sealing and insulation with that, and then also potentially using the HERE program once that is able to come online. So next slide, please. And then Greenfield Terrace, which is a 40-unit senior HUD building built in '94. We actually worked with New Ecology on a decarbonization report, which was super helpful. We identified all of our capital needs. They were able to estimate our energy savings and carbon savings of different measures. And we are using this report to plan for a refinance and a renovation of this building as well to try to get that energy usage down, because currently the rents do not cover the utility bills, which is very, very hard for preserving affordable housing. So we're excited to get going on this. And like Crafton, we are planning on using the HERE program for some air sealing and insulation, not for the HVAC replacement because this is a central system. Next slide, please. And then finally, Versailles Avenue Apartments, it's a 24-unit low-rise building that has PTAC, that has a PTAC system that we are replacing with some funding that we raised from our county. And we are planning on using the HERO program for air sealing and insulation, like I mentioned, and the HER program hopefully for the HVAC replacement, because it is going to be a PTAC replacement. We are sliding in our new units, our new heat pumps directly into the sleeve of our old ones, and they do not meet the SEER rating for that. But we are looking forward to working with both the HER and the HERE programs for these 3 buildings and many more in our portfolio. Thank you so much.
Great. Thanks, Sarah. And next we're gonna hear from Garrett Strunk, who's joined us, a special guest from the Department of Environmental Protection and a program specialist working on the HERE and HER programs, which I know many of you are here for. So take it away, Garrett.
Thank you, Liz, and thank you, Sarah and Joshua, for the previous presentations. Good overview of what this looks like potentially in the field. And I'm going to give you kind of a quick overview of the programs, and ultimately, and I will say this as well at the end of my part of the presentation, there is an email for direct contact to us, so that if you do have, like, I'll say very specific questions that may not be useful for the whole group, I'd recommend reaching out via that email, and we can start the dialogue that way. So yeah, I'll start off at a super high level. The IRA home energy rebates came from the Inflation Reduction Act. And Pennsylvania has a formula allocation for both the HER and HERE programs. HER stands for the Home Efficiency Rebates Program, and HERE stands for the Home Electrification and Appliance Rebate Program. Both of them come into about $129 million, slightly over under. You can see the total numbers there, but ultimately, these are pretty sizable programs, especially compared to other state-run programs in previous years. The HER program focuses on retrofitting households and multifamily buildings. That applies to actually both legislatively. And that is really there as an energy efficiency program. It's really there to lower utility bills and to lower overall energy usage in a given building. And the HERE program is much more geared towards building electrification, which in our case is intended to be paired with lower utility bills, but ultimately it's a point of sale rebate program for those electric appliances. We can go to the next slide, please. So in the next couple of slides, I want to highlight some elements that apply to both programs, and then we'll go into some details on each program individually. So one of the concepts that you'll hear me talk about throughout the presentation is categorical eligibility. And that can be done at 2 different levels. One is the household level and one is the building level. And when I say household, the more technical term from the legalese of the federal government is dwelling unit, which applies to essentially multifamily buildings, the units in there, or single family homes at the household level. So categorical eligibility essentially means if a person is enrolled in one of these given programs here, and a lot of these are things we know and love and are familiar with: Medicaid, the Head Start program, free school lunch program, things like that. That household or that dwelling unit is automatically considered eligible for the highest level of rebates for both programs. I'm not going to go through the list here because it's quite exhaustive, but know that if a person in a given household or dwelling unit is part of these programs, they're just by definition income eligible for the highest rebates. We'll go to the next slide, please. And then the second element of categorical eligibility is at the building level, and this is very applicable to the affordable multifamily housing sector. So essentially, if buildings are enrolled in either they're a public housing authority, they're a privately owned multifamily building, but they're receiving project-based assistance. If there's privately owned multifamily buildings that are receiving tenant-based assistance and/or LIHTC properties, those are all buildings, are a whole wide building categorically eligible. So by that means if you have buildings that are enrolled in these programs, there is no need to collect income information or program information from tenants. that just kind of bypasses that process entirely because by definition, that building meets the income requirements for our programs. I'll go into a little more detail as we go into the details of each program, but just know that at the income level, categorical eligibility applies to both, and these programs are all relevant here. We'll go to the next slide, please. Thank you. So one of the things that comes across, and this is particularly important for the multifamily sector because we're going to be housing renters, there are tenant protections built into the home energy rebates program. Ultimately, if you receive a low income rebate, which I haven't gone over this yet, but is considered 80% below the area, 80% or below the area median income, it is required that you adhere to these 4 bullet points, which is ultimately the owner of that building agrees to rent to that dwelling unit for at least 2 years that are considered low income, and that by low income for this program is below 80% AMI. Tenants can't be evicted to get higher rents based upon those improvements. Rents cannot increase because of those improvements. It is possible to increase rent due to market factors. It's not like you're locked into a nominal rent rate, but ultimately it can't be due to asset valuation or things like that. And if that property does get sold within 2 years of this period, these protections do need to be in the legal agreement for the new owner of the building so that the tenants are fundamentally protected for those 2 years. The only other thing that I will say about this is this does not supersede any other requirements of other federal programs. If there are more stringent requirements that have been used or are used in a building for categorical eligibility or really any use, those will supersede this, and ultimately those need to be adhered to as well. This really sits there as if this is the only funding source for a multifamily building, this is where this takes precedent. We'll go to the next slide. So now I'll start to go into the HERE program, and then we'll go into the HER program after this. So the HERE program is what we like to call, and what the federal legislation calls, a point of sale rebate program, and that's limited to households that make below 150% of area median income, meaning that if a household or dwelling unit makes above 150% of that area median income, they're technically not considered eligible in terms of income eligibility for the program. We'll talk about some nuances a little later, but ultimately this is meant to be a mid to low income program. It does incentivize electric appliances and enabling measures for those appliances up to $14,000 in total rebates for a given household or dwelling unit. In the case of multifamily buildings, that can be added for the number of units in a given building. We'll talk about that a little later. And then ultimately, this is what I would consider our most flexible program. It applies to both single and multifamily applicants, and we're trying to make this as accessible as possible for everyone who's eligible for this program. I do want to clarify one thing, because we get a lot of questions on this. Point of sale is not necessarily defined as your traditional, I'm going to Home Depot and I'm buying a washer dryer, and then at that point it's discounted at that sale. It is discounted at point of sale, but ultimately that point of sale is truly just point of sale to the consumer. So in the cases of multifamily buildings, it would be when you are purchasing your equipment from your contractor or your distributor. At that point, that cost should be discounted at that invoice so that you don't have to be reimbursed at a later date. It doesn't need to come from a very specific location or a specific store or anything like that. But ultimately, the point of sale essentially means that you are not having to front any cost and then repay, and then when the rebate comes in to ultimately back up that front cost later, it is truly discounted at that point of invoice. Next slide, please. So this is a table that everybody, I don't know if everyone's familiar with, but ultimately this is kind of the bread and butter of the rebate values for our program. So ultimately, I'll reiterate again, this is for low and moderate income households and dwelling units. The rebate values you see here do cover material and labor costs. So ultimately, the quotes that you would be receiving from contractors that say this heat pump's going to cost $8,000 plus $2,000 of my labor, technically that $10,000 could be counted towards the total project cost. Now, on the right-hand side, we do have rebates for each specific qualified product. I have broken these up into what I consider appliances and building materials. They're actually called slightly different things in various different forums, but I think this is the easiest way to think about it. So the qualified products are all things that need to be considered Energy Star certified. So we have heat pump water heaters. We have heat pumps for space heating and cooling, your traditional mini split systems, central air systems, things like that. Electric stoves, cooktops, ranges, and ovens, and then also heat pump clothes dryers. And something that isn't explicitly called out on here is heat pump clothes dryer with washer dryer combos, like the combo units. They are also eligible, and we have received clarification from the federal government on that. And then ultimately, there's building materials that can be used as paired alongside these options as well. Electric load service centers, which would be service upgrades to given buildings or units. Insulation, air sealing, and ventilation. I know Joshua was talking about the importance of energy efficiency first. We truly do want to keep moving by that as part of our programs here, because ultimately that is how we're going to achieve deep energy retrofits and ultimately drive energy affordability for the people going through our program. And additionally, there will also be electric wiring upgrades. So ultimately, let's say there was an oil heater or something in a unit, and we need to run electric to a heat pump that's going to be on the roof or something like that. The HERE program can account for that as well. So essentially, anything that starts from the pole to where the heat pump's going to be, we can at least incentivize up to these rebate amounts. So ultimately, the rebate amounts you can see per product or building material is the maximum we can give for that product or building material, but the sum of the total rebates can be a total of $14,000. So you can mix and match between the appliance and building material rebates to get a maximum of $14,000 per dwelling unit. Go to the next slide, please. So you'll see in the next HERE program slide that these two tables are actually condensed. It's kind of hard to read it that way in the HERE program, but there is one more table you need to understand the, I'll say, the amount of money that can be applied for a given unit. So if a house is considered low income and it is a single family home, I know this is mainly multifamily discussions here, but I'll just talk it out. And that household is less than 80% of the area median income, 100% of the total project cost can come out of that $14,000. So if a total project is within eligible rebates for those appliances and building materials, and it's under $14,000, we can pay that amount of money, and there will be no out-of-pocket cost to the consumer. For middle income folks, which we're considering between 81% and 150% AMI, and I'll back that up and say we're not considering that is legislatively how it's mandated to us. 50% of the total project cost can be incentivized. So essentially, apply that logic. If the total project cost is $28,000, we could, in theory, incentivize $14,000. So it's ultimately the lesser of those two, either the cap of rebate values or $14,000. And then this is also very similar for the HERE program, but this is kind of a sticking point for people to try to understand how income eligibility works. Multifamily buildings are technically considered categorically eligible or income qualified by the building level. So if 50% of residents would have an income less than 80% of AMI, that entire building it becomes income eligible. Not just rebate logic applies. 100% of qualified project costs can be going towards the project as long as it's considered a low income building. And then if it's in the middle income range, it's 50% of project costs. So in just quick math, in the case of, let's say it's a 10-unit building and 6 people are considered low income through either determined through categorical eligibility or standard income determinations, that whole building, all 10 units can receive assistance through this program. I think we can go to the next slide. So the next couple of slides here for the HERE program are really, we're calling them application considerations. What that really means is actually our application to the federal government, really outlining what we can and can't do with the program. So these considerations are, I would consider them more of design decisions than considerations themselves. But ultimately, we did decide to go with the maximum rebate levels available to applicants. So the rebate levels that we saw on the previous slides and the income determinations were the highest level allowable by the federal government. So we are ultimately trying to open that as broad as we can. I will say this, the next two slides are awaiting new guidance, or not 2 slides, 2 bullets are awaiting new guidance. We have reserved in our application 40.3% for low income single family homes and 10% reserved for low income multifamily homes. In January, at the turn of the administration, there was an executive order to eliminate the Justice 40 initiative. We do not have to abide by that. And ultimately, we have not been asked to change our application. So the legal agreement between us and the federal government at this point remain what it was at the time of the previous administration. So we are planning to abide by this, but note that new guidance may come out and that may change, but that is how we're planning to allocate so far. And these are minimums. That's not necessarily what we're shooting for, but that is something that we're going to be holding ourselves to, at least at the contractual agreement level with the federal government. Finally, we have rebate delivery costs, which is something that's kind of, I'll say, confusing to the outside viewer. Ultimately, what rebate delivery costs are costs that are necessary for a building to receive rebates, but may not be directly involved in the installation of the product. So, like I was talking about heat pumps before. Heat pumps may need a panel upgrade, some wiring, and the heat pump itself to be incentivized. But what happens to the fact that there was a gas cap there? The gas cap, line capping, stuff like that isn't necessarily part of the install, but we do have rebate delivery costs that can cover that. These rebate delivery costs do not eat into that $14,000. It's in addition to, and are things that we need to have approval upon at the point of when a scope of work is determined. So ultimately, this, I already used one example, but this is something that's like gas line capping, or if there's a home assessment needed for HVAC, things like that, that are just kind of outside the realm, but enable rebates to go into a given home. That's what these rebate delivery costs are for. So we do have some money reserved for that. Next slide, please. So finally, this is, I'll say, a little more of the detailed income verification steps that we have talked about in our application and are ultimately going to be enforcing when we open the program. So we are incorporating a digital tracking system that's provided by the Department of Energy that is for application eligibility determination. What this means is the process for actually reserving money at the federal government is streamlined compared to some other states. Some states are doing this very manually, accepting applications, dropping them into an Excel spreadsheet, sending that Excel spreadsheet out and getting approval. We decided to do this digitally via an API with our system of record for applications. Ultimately, that income documentation that we're talking about is going to be required for the program in general. We're not going to be allowing for pure self-attestation. You'll see that a little later. I'll come back to that. Something that was originally possible with the program, but after further guidance in June of 24, I think it was, that is something that's no longer possible. We did choose to allow categorical eligibility within select programs. Ultimately, the states did have the right to not allow categorical eligibility. We did have the option to collect all of the income information outside of programs. We felt that was going to be very disproportionately skewing towards middle income folks. Wouldn't be allowing easy income verification for low income programs. So. And then ultimately, like I had said previously, the income documentation must be reviewed for 100% of our applicants, which does mean either pay stub collection, tax return collection, or categorical eligibility documentation. Ultimately, the participants who are going through the program really are going to be able to, I'll say upfront, say that they are income eligible for the HERE program, but do need to provide income within 6 months after the installation is completed. The reason we are doing that is not something that's actually by our choice. It is something that is required by the federal government. And ultimately, that we do need to have the proof of income for every rebate before we can technically close it out. So we will need to be collecting that. If buildings are categorically eligible, that is not something that's required because by definition, they're income qualified. So a lot of the folks here, I believe, are going to fall into that group. Next slide, please. So now I'll move into the HER program. And the HER program is what we're considering the sister program to the HERE program. And ultimately, they are going to be paired in a lot of ways, but they can be used separately as well. So the rebate program for the HER program focuses on modeling energy savings and I see I did not define this here. ECM is energy conservation measure, is eligible if it saves energy. So ultimately, the way you can read that is if there is something that can be done to a building to lower energy usage, and that can be proven through an energy model, that is something that we will allow as part of a rebatable item. The rebate values are dependent upon energy savings, and more energy savings unlock more of that rebate value. We'll get into that as we move a little forward here. And then ultimately, and this is kind of the big news, it's not even big news, we've talked about this quite a bit, but it's for this group, I think it's really important to know. We are planning to open the HER program as an exclusively multifamily program, and heavily focused on low income. For multifamily buildings, an ASHRAE level 2 audit is what is legislatively required to open the door for the rebate. So that is something that will start as kind of snapping the energy baseline for that given building. Next slide, please. So this is that chart I had alluded to earlier. Ultimately, this is the rebate chart for the HER program. What I can say, and I'm going to take a step back here a second because I realized I didn't say this out loud. The HERE program, we have received our full program approval, but we do not yet have approval to launch the program from the federal government, and we are awaiting that imminently. The HER program, we have what the federal government is calling partial conditional approval, which means the programmatic elements that I'm discussing with you here have been approved, but there are some budgetary elements that have not been reviewed by the people that must review them at the federal government to get the full approval for the program. So there's technically 2 layers we have to go through to open this program, and one of those is a budgetary review, but know that everything that I have coming here for the HER program is how the application has been submitted to the Department of Energy and programmatically has been approved. So for the HER rebate program, the rebates are going to be limited to the dollar cap that you can see on the right of this chart, and I will go into this in greater detail, or the percentage of total project cost, whichever is less. As I've said this previously, the whole building is eligible if it's income eligible, not just the eligible units. So as long as 50% of the building is a qualified income level, the entire building is eligible. And again, if categorical eligibility comes into play because you're a LIHTC property or something like that, just don't even worry about that. The whole building's eligible. The rebate levels are on a per unit basis, and buildings can qualify for more because they have many units. Ultimately, what that means is if you have a 10-unit building and you apply and you can get to that $16,000 rebate value, which we'll talk about, I will walk you through this slide, you could have a total $160,000 of rebates for that given building. It does multiply by the number of units that are in the building. There is no cap. So ultimately, I did not include any of the single family discussion here because we are opening as a multifamily building. And you can see that the income levels are separated by that 80% area median income again. So if we assume that we're considered a low income building, a minimum of 20% energy modeled savings need to be demonstrated to unlock a certain rebate amount. So that low income amount measuring between 20 and 34% energy savings can get 100% of the total proposed project costs up to $10,000. That's how you read this chart. If you are a low income building and you can demonstrate above 35% energy savings in a given model for a low income building, 100% of those total project costs can apply, and $16,000 is the nominal maximum amount for that given unit. So ultimately what that means is deeper energy savings of 35% or above can receive higher rebate values then I'll say more, not necessarily marginal, still very significant energy savings, but less significant energy savings up to the floor of 20% of that total model. What I can say is we do, and it is part of the application that we must answer this. So we are planning to open the program with a moderate income portion of the program as well. So ultimately, this would be considered not categorically eligible, not low income. Same logic applies, but the rebate amounts per unit are significantly reduced, 2,000 and 4,000 respectively for those model energy savings. And ultimately, what you can't see here is moderate income buildings do have a nominal cap of $400,000 per given building if you are a moderate income building. Low income buildings do not have a total building cap. Next slide, please. So ultimately, this is a very similar slide to the HERE program. We're going to go through some of the things that we talked about in our application. And ultimately, it's pretty similar in structure to the HERE program of how the application actually flowed. The difference here is we are planning to allocate 100% of our rebates for the multifamily program. Ultimately, we've found that through various analyses in Pennsylvania specifically that the affordable multifamily housing sector is very underserved by energy programs. And ultimately, this is a good program that is more flexible for larger projects. And because of that, we decided to allocate our entirety of our budget that we can for rebates to low-income multifamily. We technically have reserved, again, 40.3% of that rebate program for low-income multifamily buildings. Again, that is something that the federal government may ask us to change in the future because of the executive orders that have come out. However, we have not received indication that we have to yet. What that means is, sorry, I lost my train of thought there. So what that means is we are signed up to give at least 40% of this total project out. Realistically, we've designed the program that it's entirely more enticing for low-income folks just by the rebate values that are available for low-income folks. So we're really expecting and anticipating to spend the majority of this, or the overwhelming majority of this, in the low-income housing sector. Again, we have rebate delivery costs in this, same explanation as before. But ultimately, what this can be used for as well is ASHRAE Level 2 audit funding. So that is kind of like I said, the baseline snapping for before any form of energy conservation measures are proposed. The ASHRAE Level 2 audit is the basis for how a building is currently performing, and then ultimately those energy conservation measures can be compared upon that energy performance to determine if that building is eligible. So one thing I will say is, because these two elements here are technically budgetary items, these can be changed by the federal government because we have not received that budget approval I had talked about earlier. We don't have any indication that that's happening, but know that technically this has not gotten past that final review yet because it is a budgetary item. Next slide, please. Again, and this is a lot of, I'll say review, but I will highlight some of the changes here. We did incorporate the DOE tracking system into this program. It is automated, will be faster than if we were to do this manually. Ultimately, we do have the income documentation for income eligibility determination set at that 50% of buildings, or 50% of dwelling units for that given building. That was something that we could allow, that 100% or a certain percentage of buildings or occupants within a building need to be considered low income. If we did that, it would have made the income documentation collection much more onerous, especially when talking about where that can overlap with categorical eligibility. So ultimately, we decided to keep it at that 50%. Again, categorical eligibility is allowed. That was something we could not allow if we wanted to. We definitely do in this case. And because of this, not because of this, just in general, we will be reviewing income documentation for all applicants. That is not something we're allowing self-attestation of income for, ultimately because This is going to be a low-income multifamily program, primarily, I would think, we think anyway, dominated by categorical eligibility as a way of income verification. And self-attestation would require multifamily building owners to have every single tenant self-attest that their income is low. And that is something that is very onerous, we know, on low-income, well, just multifamily owners in general, building operators. So we're not planning to do that. And another piece of note here is we do know that a lot of these programs that are categorically eligible are partnered with or are run through the Pennsylvania Housing Finance Agency. And ultimately, we're coordinating parts of, I'll say, data sharing, as well as just understanding what types of buildings are out there and we can approach as part of the program. Ultimately, if you are engaging with the PHFA portfolio or the PHFA products that are out there, you are pretty much by definition categorically eligible. So you keep that in mind as well. Next slide. One thing that is kind of littered throughout the HER discussion, but ultimately is something that we did decide, is we did decide to go with an energy modeling program rather than an energy measuring program. So what does that mean? That really does mean that we have ASHRAE level 2 energy audits as the basis for receiving a rebate. Ultimately, what that means is we must have that ASHRAE level 2 energy audit to understand what that building was originally going to be or is operating under, and then we can use the energy conservation measures as a way to prove the energy savings. There is alternatively an elected approach that we could have implemented, a measured approach, which would essentially require utility bill collection for all of the residents in a multifamily building. And that includes gas, electric, or whatever really is there. One of the things that is a struggle with that is not every utility, and I would say I think it's really just PECO and Duquesne Light at this point, I may be wrong, do not necessarily have very easily accessible whole building aggregated utility data. And because of that, if buildings are individually metered, it becomes a burden on the building owners to collect this utility data to make this possible. And we kind of weighed the decision of designing this program out with that versus just allowing model approaches to be the primary use. Ultimately, the measured approach is very complex, and we actually don't have an instance of any other state implementing a measured approach in a multifamily setting. So ultimately, we decided not to allow that the measured approach. If as the program matures, we see there's opportunities there, we will ultimately consider designing that into future versions of this program. Next slide, please. So I'm at the end of my presentation. I know this was a ton of information, and I apologize. I know there was a comment in here that I was talking very quickly. I have a tendency to do that. I apologize. I did want to get through this because I felt that having a lot of time for questions and answers are good. So thank you for your patience and thank you for listening. Ultimately, if you do have specific questions and want to talk to us directly, myself, Sean Gray, or Taylor Lightman, they're both in here in the chats answering questions right now, I think. We do have a resource account email that can be emailed to access our contacts directly. Ultimately, we're monitoring that to have interested parties, even contractors, things like that, who want to be engaged with either of these programs or both. Please reach out to that if you want to get in contact with us directly after this meeting. That would be great. Ultimately, please feel free to put some questions in there and we'll be getting to it. Thank you.
Let's see. Thanks, Garrett. I really appreciate that information. If the panelists can come back on camera, I'm going to quickly just remind folks who everybody is, and we'll get started on some questions. I've been in the background trying to cull a lot of questions, queue some up, so stay with us through the next half an hour if you'd like to hear some answers. But Hi, everyone. Liz Marks. I'm the Executive Director of the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project, and I'll be moderating this part of our discussion. So keep questions coming. We've been trying to monitor them and pull together ones with common threads. So get those typed in. You heard from Joshua Galloway at New Ecology and Sarah Rolich at Action Housing, two really strong partners of ours. Also with us in the background, Jack Stucker from Regional Housing Legal Services, as well as Laura Ettinger, also with my organization, the Pennsylvania Utility Law Project. We have Chris Michael with the Housing Alliance, and then we have our three guests, both Garrett Strunk from DEP, and then we have Taylor Lightman and Sean Gray, who have been answering a lot of your questions, also from the Department of Environmental Protection. I will note that, as we get started, there was a lot of questions about, will there be technical assistance? Is there someone that can talk to me about my project or my building? And so I want to just start and ask, Joshua, you mentioned we've got, we've got a partnership, Pulp and New Ecology, Action Housing, and Regional Housing Legal Services together with the Housing Alliance. We've been working on a project, but maybe, you asked that poll, what's the available, what assistance would help you? Joshua, Sarah, could you speak a little bit to what help we as a kind of project team might be able to help folks with moving forward? I know we're still developing it, but maybe you could speak to that a little bit.
Yes, thank you, Liz. Joshua Galloway with New Ecology. We are going to be providing technical assistance in a couple different ways, really tailored to what your needs are. We obviously can't sit down and speak with everyone, but we'll be likely, based on the survey, doing some phone conversations, some in-person conversations. There's the ability to do some energy audits if you have a property that is getting ready to go through a low-income housing tax credit application or another funding source. We find that that's the best opportunity to do a kind of a larger or to bring in electrification when you're already planning to do a renovation. And so the best thing we can or what we ask from you is just to let us know what kind of resources you all need, and then we can hopefully put together those to offer them.
Thanks. And I'll note we'll keep following up. So do reach out, and we've got your information now. Hopefully you all responded to the polls. I noticed in the poll we only had one person indicate that they were interested in auditing assistance. And I think that might be because folks weren't quite sure what an audit is. So I want to ask all three of the panelists if you could talk about why an audit is necessary, maybe Joshua, Sarah, what it might cost, and whether or not there'll be some help for those who want to participate in her with that ASHRAE Level 2 audit. I know that's an acronym a lot of people are probably not familiar with, so maybe you could just briefly talk, and I think all three of you probably have a different perspective or something to add on that question.
I would just ask Sarah to describe kind of what the energy audit allowed her company to do. So I thought that the way you presented that, Sarah, was really helpful.
Sure. Yeah. So we've done energy audits on a few of our existing buildings, and it really allows us to understand what our current energy usage is and what it would be after certain measures are installed, whether that be heating and cooling upgrades, whether that be ventilation upgrades, air sealing and insulation. And as I mentioned, we've used New Ecology for one of our buildings, and we've also used local MEP engineers, local decarbonization consultant experts for Crafton Towers, and it really allows us to understand, the total energy reduction potential, and also what systems would be best for our buildings to achieve our goals.
Thanks, Sarah. So what does an ASHRAE 2 level audit cost? And if somebody's going to participate in her, how would they cover that?
So I can speak to the funding purposes. And then I will say to the cost, it is heavily dependent upon building size. Ultimately, the larger the building, the more of the cost. I mean, I've seen audits as low as about $7,000, but also we're talking 30 plus depending on the size. What I can say is we do have that budget allocated as part of rebate delivery costs. Actually, I should back that up. We're actually asking our program implementer that we're going out to bid for, as soon as we get approval to do that, to be able to do ASHRAE level 2 audits as part of their contract, so that if buildings do come to the front door of the HER program, we can provide that service. What I can say is that if you do have an existing ASHRAE level 2 audit that's fairly recent, then I'm gonna need to dig up the actual time frame on that because I don't have it off the top of my head. That can be used as the baseline. So ultimately, the program will be providing financial assistance and, frankly, the ability to possibly do this for free, as long as that's something that the federal government allows us to do.
You hit on an important thing, Garrett, and one thing that we've seen in the questions, it was answered, in text, but just for the purposes of the recording, I think, the question on most people's mind is, how's it going with the federal government? It sounds like you're pretty positive that, or pretty, hopeful.
Yeah.
I'll say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but tell us when you think we'll see this program launch,
Sure,
and here.
I can speak to that. So I'll say it this way: we have our internal timelines that are based off of our process that we have to go through once we get approval to launch these programs, and then those are ultimately, I'll say, gated by the approvals that we need from the federal government. We are, like I said, imminently awaiting approvals from the federal government for the HERE program. And ultimately, if we do get them, I mean, let's say we get them today, right? Something like that, which totally, that becomes not a factor for us. We're looking to open that program in Q3 of this year. That is, like I said, very heavily dependent upon what we can and can't do with the federal government. And I will say this too, just to add a little clarity and, frankly, just transparency. I think we're in a time where transparency is really important. That we are not actually allowed to spend funds on what is not designated as pre-launch activities for the program until we receive that approval to launch. So that includes applicants, that includes ASHRAE level 2, I should say L2, but ASHRAE level 2 audits, homes assessments, things like that. We can get in contact with folks, but we can't actually do the work until we receive that approval to launch. So there is going to be an element of us having to ultimately, I'll say, staff up, for lack of a better term, to get the capacity needed once we get that approval to launch to go. So I will just ask that everyone understands that that's where we are, but we are ready to go. So Q3 for HERE. HERE is in I'll say, 2 layers of approval back of launch. One is that program, that budget approval that we need, and the second one is that approval to launch. That program likely will be opening in I'll say late Q4 of this year, but likely Q1 of next year at this point, because we haven't seen a ton of movement on that from the federal government since we applied back in October. Generally speaking, the federal government has been in contact with us. Our project officer, who would be considered like our point of contact project manager at the federal level, is still present. We're talking to him, and he has reached out to us on multiple occasions to get more information. So there is movement. There is, I don't think this is overstepping in any way. We're not able to get much more information than that at this point. Ultimately, he is our point of contact, and we can only get as much information from him as we can get. So overall, I'd say we're hopeful. We don't have any indication that this is slowing, but ultimately we are at their green light to actually open the programs.
Thanks, Garrett. I want to ask Sarah and Joshua, your case examples, they didn't rely on IRA funding, right? Are there things that you would encourage folks to do while we wait for these programs? Just to, reiterate that there are things that there can be done.
Yeah, I mean, you could get your portfolio data collected, right? All of, your utility information, your energy usage information, your HVAC inventories, and really start to think about what buildings you are planning for any capital needs or any refinances, because as Joshua and Garrett said, that's really a good opportunity to take advantage of these programs, is adding something else into your capital stack of a project that you're already doing and building. And sometimes, a renovation can take a year to plan, things like that. So it's a good time now, while we're waiting for these programs to open, to take a good look at your portfolio and your buildings to determine what your priorities are.
I'll just add that we look at all the available funding, whether it be state or regional or philanthropic. It's just like any affordable housing deal. It requires 10 or 20 funding sources. And so part of this operation is to kind of share with you all what opportunities there are. And it just starts with a conversation about what properties you're looking to renovate, and what's your time frame and what are your needs.
Yeah, I'll add to that we're doing a 4% LIHTC deal for one of our retrofits that we intend to use the Her and the Here program for, and we're starting that process in anticipation of that. Because it could be a long process. It could take up to a year, so.
Thanks. And I want to use that to open up a larger question, and this is going to hit at a number of questions that folks have asked. Act 129 is the biggest energy efficiency program in Pennsylvania. They're in the middle of a planning phase right now with new programs to launch next year. I'll mention, I see a colleague on our webinar from one of the gas utilities, and some of the gas utilities have voluntary, they're not required to, but they run energy efficiency programs, some with, programming for multifamily. So Sarah, you also mentioned in your presentation that you had one building that or 20 buildings that have gone through the Act 129 programming. I wonder, there's a two-part question I want to hit Sarah and Garrett and Joshua. What are the savings achievable, or that you have achieved, Sarah, from participating in those? Are they worth the trade-off in terms of staff time and investment that it can take for a multifamily building owner? And second part, Garrett, how are these programs being coordinated with Act 129 programming so that we can hit some of the enabling measures or some of the, the costs that may not be accounted for to try and leverage more savings? So the two of you could kind of talk about that, and Joshua, if you have anything to add.
Yeah, I'll go first, Garrett. So yes, we have taken approximately 20 of our buildings through our Act 129 utility rebate. We are all in Allegheny County, so we are Duquesne-like customers all around. So I cannot speak to any of the other electric companies in the state and how they run their programs. But to date, that has primarily been a lighting replacement program. We haven't been able to install any measures that are deeper than that. But that being said, getting all new LED lights for half the price in your buildings is very substantial, because, the light bulbs burn out and technology gets better. And I can't speak to the exact savings calculations. I would need to look up all of my spreadsheets that are somewhere else right now. But getting new equipment for your buildings is always worth staff time, in my opinion. And the rebates are substantial for that. They are in the planning processes for the next phase of Act 129 right now. So we don't know what the future will bring as far as measures, and the deeper the measures, and also how much rebates are going to be available for multifamily buildings. We are hopeful, though, and we are also hopeful that they're going to be able to coordinate with Garrett and his team for the rebates.
And yeah, thank you, Sarah. And also, I can say that this is actually a little behind the curtain, more detail as to why we actually chose those rebate values to begin with. One of the things for the HER program specifically that we went through actually applying to the federal government is doing an analysis of the building stock of Pennsylvania alongside Guidehouse. I think I actually saw someone from Guidehouse on, so shout out to you. But ultimately, we did a market analysis that determined really what level of investment needs to be done in these buildings on a per unit basis to achieve those energy savings that the rebates would ultimately be applicable for. And what we did is we saw that ultimately those rebate values needed to be actually increased from what the federal government recommended. As I had said in the presentation, they were $10,000 and $16,000 for 20 to 34 or 35+% energy savings, respectively. The federal government, their going in position, I'll say, is their standard response is 4,000 and 8,000 respectively. So we saw that we needed to actually invest more in those buildings to get those energy savings, to have a minimal cost share for low income multifamily buildings. And when I say minimal cost share, this is where Act 129 is actually supposed to come in. Ultimately, there are requirements for federal funding anyway that are not loans, but federal funding that are rebates or grants or things like that, that they can't co-fund specific measures. So here can't pay for a heat pump, part of a heat pump, and HER can't pay for the other part of the heat pump. However, utility programs can do that. So ultimately, we are heavily coordinating with our EDCs to deploy these funds. We're actually the Act 129 program is going through its phase 5 planning right now, and we're involved in that as well. To the point that we are planning to deploy these alongside of Act 129 programs and engage those utility programs as cost shares do show up if there's costs above and beyond those rebate values. We do recognize that the low income multifamily sector doesn't really have a lot of free cash sitting around to just invest in these buildings. So low cost share or no cost share, even better, is what we need to do, and the utility programs are going to be the key to doing that.
Thanks, Garrett. And quick follow-up question to that. There's some questions around enabling measures and whether or not you have more specifics for what HERE can cover. I wonder if you could briefly talk about that, but also, are you coordinating with other home repair programs and weatherization to provide the enabling measures necessary to do some of the repair work that needs to happen as a precursor to electrification and to energy efficiency?
Sure. Yeah, and there's a couple different threads there that I think I'll try to touch on individually. I can say for the HERE program, for delivery costs, and this is getting a little technical into how the program is going to function, and I think it's Prem that said this one. We can actually sync up off this because we can talk offline too. However, the HERE program for single family actually has what I like to consider an organic application, and I totally realized that I didn't actually drop the website link in the chat. So I'm going to do that. In the chat, there is the web link to the Penn Energy Savers website. That is what we're branding the HERE program as. We haven't necessarily done a big launch with this yet because it's ultimately not able to be launched. But know that that's where the information is gathered. And on that website, there's an application, and that's where I'll say at least we hope the majority of people go to actually come to the front door of the HERE program. And as you go through that application, our contractor, Resource Innovations, they're our implementer for the program, picks up that application, does the initial scoping, and then ultimately assigns every applicant a case manager and a physical person who walks that person through the concept of that retrofitting their home. In that case, that case manager will send out an assessor, and that assessor is ultimately walking through with the homeowner to determine what is eligible for rebates and rebate delivery costs. So that discussion happens one-on-one during that assessment period. Now, can I say that, do I have specific a table that says these things cost this much, I can give you that? No, I don't. I think we can have discussions around what's eligible. There really isn't great guidance on that from the federal government, so we're really treating it as an as-needed subset of funds. And when we're talking about the multifamily buildings, ultimately, this requires a deeper level conversation for a lot of this, right? Because it's not like we're planning to retrofit one unit in this 150 unit building. We're talking about building wide retrofits. So the discussion of what rebate delivery costs can be done can happen with the program directly at the time of engagement of these rebate programs. So ultimately, there's actually a person that's going to be walking you through this. It's not just you got to figure this out on your own, don't ask questions kind of thing.
Thanks, Garrett. That's really good information
Mhm.
about the case manager. Will that person be equipped to, help them access other types of programming beyond here and her that can be stacked or can help with the intersectional issues going on in the home?
Yes, the case managers are knowledgeable of other funding sources, specifically the utility programs and the weatherization programs are the ones that come to the most immediate mind. And as you had mentioned, and thank you for bringing this back because this was the thread that I missed, the home repair programs. Ultimately, the idea of this case manager is to be that point of contact to say, um, you know, program, come here and I want a new heat pump. But they are ultimately the ones, and the assessor combined as a unit are there to say, your house is actually not sealed well. Maybe in that case you should go through the weatherization program first to actually receive energy savings. There are checks in terms of actual utility bill analysis too. I didn't touch on this. Every HERE rebate for a unit needs to be paired with the utility bill analysis to essentially estimate. I can't say, I'm not going to be able to sign up and say that this is 100% accurate every time, but it is estimating the given energy usage for the new upgrades. Because there isn't energy savings directly modeled through the HERE program, there is a utility bill analysis to make sure that the consumer who's going through that program or the multifamily building owner knows what their utility bills are projected to be after all of that work is done.
Thanks, super helpful information. I want to ask a couple of more specific questions. I know there's probably a lot of folks on this call there's a question from a community land trust, but others on this call who rehab low-income homes and resell them, or are not the direct owner of that building or technical homeowner, but they have, they're working in affordable housing. Any kind of comments on that in terms of eligibility for programs like this, if they are working on their rehab, but ultimately are going to sell to the low-income homeowner?
Yes, and this scenario is something we're actually actively working through with, I'll say, just a couple other stakeholders at this point. I will not lie, I'll be transparent. This is something that is a little complex for the HERE program to handle. However, it is technically eligible. So income eligibility, and I don't think I actually said this, the income eligibility for both programs is for the person living in that home or will be living in that home in the case of the HERE program, actually. So the HERE program can actually fund energy efficient appliances, specifically Energy Star appliances for new housing as well, as long as it's guaranteed to be rented or sold to low income folks. And that kind of logic can be applied to rehabs that are turned around to be sold as well. I will say that the documentation required for like selling that is something that we need to work through yet on the HERE program. And I would actually very much recommend that if you have, I'll say opportunities that you're working through with the HERE program, to reach out to us directly, because this is something that we want to actually continue to refine as we move forward as well. Work with you directly to see what makes sense, and ultimately also being compliant with what we need to federally. I hope that answered the question.
I think that I hope so too. I think it was some good information and certainly some follow-up. I want to ask one last grouping of questions that I saw come through from a couple different folks, and I think this could be Sarah, Joshua, Garrett. You may all have something to say about this, but fuel switching is we've been talking about electrification, oil to gas, gas to electric, oil to electric. what do the programs have to say about it? And, you know, where does somebody start when they have a building of that type? And, you know, any comments you have to that. Again, I'm trying to swipe as many of those questions at once in the last minute we've got. So,
Sure.
comments on fuel switching.
I'll start first. So what I can say is this: when you see the HERE program and you see the title, I mean, electrification's in the title. We can only incentivize electric upgrades. Specifically for I'll say the heat pump replacements. We're talking heat pump water heaters, heat pump clothes dryers, heat pumps for space heating and cooling. The only thing we can't do is heat pump to heat pump. So if you have an old heat pump for that's space heating a certain area, we can't replace that with a new heat pump. That's not something that's possible. It's legislatively not possible.
I think, oh, I'm sorry, but I think we're out of time, everyone. I want to say, I don't want to like take up, you know, time from our attendees, but thank you all for joining us. If you have any questions, you know, feel free to email the group, email the Housing Alliance, and we'll get your questions to our presenters and our panelists. Yeah, thank you all for joining us, and thank you to everyone on the back end. Thank you to all our panelists, our moderator Liz, for joining us today.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you. See ya.